The purpose of this video is to show you how the actual design process occurs for a database. We're going to start with a fictional company called Eatery. It's a restaurant. The restaurant has some employees, and we've already done the groundwork of actually talking to these employees to see what they need. So we have a manager. The manager is going to need to see some reports about profits for the company. The manager is responsible for scheduling shifts for the employees and responsible for ordering inventory. We have a head waiter who's responsible for assigning tables to waiters and waitresses. The head waiter is responsible for performing normal waiter functions, so actually serving customers, and then also providing bills to customers for orders. We have a hostess or a host who is responsible for scheduling customer reservations, assigns customers to tables, and is also responsible for posting specials. Maybe they have a one of those signs out front that they post and say, today we have a special on pasta or whatever it is. We have a head chef who's responsible for using current inventory to decide what our specials are. He or she is responsible for purchasing food items, and also he or she is responsible for assigning food prep job functions to other chefs and assistants. So maybe we have some chefs that are responsible for baking cakes and other desserts, and we have our sous chef. We have people that are responsible for appetizers and hors d'oeuvres, and so the head chef is responsible for that. Then we also have a bartender, and the bartender is responsible for maintaining a drink inventory, orders food for the bar patrons. So if somebody goes to the bar and actually orders food, they are going to also act like a waiter or waitress, and then also ring up transactions, so they actually provide the bill for it. So the purpose of this is to try to figure out what they need. Now, every time a customer checks out, they're going to be presented with a receipt. Now, this is an existing document, so what we can see here is that we have the name of the company is listed at the top. We have the date, we have the time, we have the name of the server, we have a list of the items they have, the quantity, how much it is for each item, and then a computed amount to figure out what the subtotal is. So you can see that two of these clams at $14.99 a piece is $29.98. And then we have a subtotal, we have the tax, the tip provided by the patron, and then also the total here, and then there's a saying at the bottom that allows us to keep track of what, maybe we have a saying for thank you for eating with us, maybe later on in the year we have Merry Christmas, maybe we'll have things like Happy Valentine's Day. So we'll have different sayings at different times of the year. Now what this does is it allows us to use this existing documentation to try to figure out what things they need in the database. Alright, so things like the name of the company. Even though this isn't going to change, we're going to want this to come out of a database somewhere. I mean, we're going to have a table that has just simply information about what the company is. We'll have a table that has a list of our servers. We'll have a table with a list of products and their prices. We'll have a table for sayings. Maybe we want to save different sayings, that way we can select different ones at different times of the year. So this one little document right here actually gives us quite a bit of information that we need related to our company. Now I'm going to design this database. I'm going to start the actual design by using Microsoft Word. No, it's not necessarily the ideal environment for doing this, but the reason for doing so is so that I can draw some basic tables and I can enter some information in it and maybe make it a little bit easier for you to see. Alright, so what I need to do is I need to start modifying or creating a database. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with things like, we know we have a company, and so therefore we're going to have what we're going to call a company information table. So I'm going to make a table called company info, and it's going to have some things like the name of the company. It'll have our telephone number, address, things like that would be listed in there. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an ID column just for the purpose of having a primary key. We're going to make a name field, and then we're going to do something like address, telephone, maybe website, maybe if we have an email address or something like that. Now the problem with email, if I do this, that would limit me to only one email address. So later on, maybe we need to keep track of all of our email addresses. Alright, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to list in here that we have a primary key of ID, and the rest of this stuff that's listed in here is all just simply non-key columns. All right, so that table is just simply for the purpose of being able to get the name and address of our company and put it onto a receipt. All right, so then we have a table that has things to do with a manager. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I need something to keep track of all of our employees. So I'm going to make an employee table, and I'm also going to make a manager table. Now I'll show you in a few minutes. While I can have these as two separate tables, I actually could have them as one. So I want to show this to you in just a second. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an employee table. Every employee has an ID. Every employee has a first name, a last name. Maybe they have an address, city, state, zip, telephone, email. We'll have driver's license number, have a social security number, and so forth. All right, so we're going to have a primary key of ID, and their first name. All the rest of those for right now are just simply going to be non-key columns. All right, so if I were to make an employee table and then also make a manager table, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have ID and then first name, last name, address, city, state. Notice this looks a lot alike. Okay, so, well, what if I don't want to necessarily do this? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I want to list that it is possible for our employees, for somebody in this table to be a manager. So what I mean by that is, let's say we have an employee who is 35, whose manager is employee ID number 3. That is possible. Okay, so what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to put another column that just simply is manager ID. Okay, now the manager ID field, while it is a foreign key, can point back to the employee table. So what I want to show you is that, oops, and I'm sorry, I don't want manager ID here. I want manager ID up here. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to say that the primary key is ID, and then our foreign key of manager ID, that points to employee.id. So what this would mean is if I had a table with employees in it, we could actually show some information. All right, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 columns here. So I'm going to insert a table. Now it only allows me to have 11 wide, so we're going to have to insert some others. Okay, so I have ID, first name, last name. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink the size of this just so we can see it a little bit better. Make these smaller. Okay, so then we have address, city, state, zip, telephone, email, driver license, social security number, and manager ID. Now, this is not in fourth normal form because this manager ID column, to put it in fourth normal form, we should have a completely separate table. For now, we're going to leave it like it is. Okay, so employee ID number 1 is Bob Smith, who lives at 123 Main Street in Glasgow, Kentucky, 42141. Phone number is 555-1212. bob@email.com. Driver's license number is S123. And so much for that. Let's get rid of these real quick. All right, so a driver's license number is S123-1234. Social security number 123-456789. And his manager ID is manager 1. Bob is his own manager. So Bob is our first employee. Maybe he's the owner of the company. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have employee number 2 is Jane Smith. Let's call it Jane Doe. And she lives at 234 2nd Street. And that's Glasgow, Kentucky, 42141. 555-2323. She's a jane@email.com. And her driver's license number is D. I'm just making up numbers for her. And her manager ID is also ID number 1. So now what happens is if I want to find out who her manager is, by looking at this, we can look at manager ID is a foreign key. However, it's a foreign key back to the same table.id field. So manager ID number 1 points back here, and it is manager ID number 1 which is Bob Smith. Now, the only problem with this is going to be when you get into MySQL, we have some requirements. And the requirement is that if I try to commit this record, it's going to look up this value to make sure it exists. Okay, now Jane's is going to work, but Bob's won't. Bob's will not allow me to add him. So what I'm actually going to have to do is I'm going to have to leave Bob as no manager, so we're going to have to allow nulls for this column to begin with. Then after we add him, then we can come back in here and put that he's his own manager. So what that does for us is it makes it where we can actually put some constraints on the database and we can have that data in there. All right, so that's our employee table. All right, so now we have head waiter. So now what we can do is we can start adding additional things. So like our employees, each employee is going to have a position. So maybe we need to list what their position is. Okay, so let's say position, and then so what I did was before address. We're going to add another column. We'll call it position. All right, just to make this so it's a little bit wider, I'm going to put this to landscape, so I have some extra room. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this Bob is our owner, which is position ID number 1. Okay, so now if that's position ID number 1, then I need to list it. So foreign key of position is going to point to some position table and ID. Well, what that means is that I need another table to keep track of this. So I'm going to make a position table. Each position has an ID and then maybe a description. All right, so then what we're going to do is we're going to say our primary key here is ID. And so now if we have position 1 could be owner. Position 2 could be hostess or host. And all right, so Jane Doe we're going to say is position 2. He or she in this case is going to be our hostess. So that's position 2 and so forth. All right, so we also have things like our head waiters. All right, so the head waiter assigns tables. Oh, hey, look, we need a table to deal with tables. All right, so we're going to have a table that has a list of all of our tables that we have. All right, so each table is an ID number. Maybe it has a location in the restaurant. It's going to have something like the number of seats that the table has. Let's see, we could have, if it has a view, what kind of view do we have? All right, so if that's a view type, then we have view type ID, which means it's going to point to some other table. So we're going to have a primary key of ID. We are going to have our, let's see, a foreign key of view type ID, which points to some other table. All right, so this, if it's pointing to some other table, then we need another table, so it's going to call it view type. And then this table will have ID, and then we're going to have a description. So maybe we have like a courtyard view, maybe we have the other side of the building is glass front over the lake or something like that. And so we're going to have a primary key here of ID. And so this up here, view type ID, points to view type dot ID. And now what we're doing is we're just simply making that if this table has 4 seats and it's lakefront, we can list that by specifying the view type ID of maybe 2 or 3 or whatever number it is. Okay, so then our head waiter is also going to perform normal waiter functions, so we need to know what a waiter does. Okay, so a waiter serves food. Okay, well, how do we have food? Well, that means that we need a menu. Okay, so we're going to have a table for our menu. All right, so our menu is going to have things like an ID. Every item is going to have a name, maybe some sort of description that's listed. Then we'll have something like how much it costs. Let's see, what else is going to be there? Maybe we're going to keep track of how many calories it is because we're now required to keep that kind of information. Maybe it's the fat count. And then we'll have other stuff listed about the menu. All right, so the menu is going to have a primary key of ID. And so now we have a menu that would allow us to keep track of what stuff's on the menu. All right, so then we also need to keep track of things like our customers. Well, hey, we need a table for customers. So we need a customer table. So we have ID. Every customer is going to have a name, address, telephone number, and maybe an email address in case we need it. All right, so then the primary key is going to be ID. Let's get rid of this so we can put it closer. All right, so primary key is ID. And then we're going to keep going with, we need something to be able to schedule customer reservations. Oh, okay, so we're going to have a reservation table. And a reservation table is going to have an ID for each reservation. Remember, we just simply need something to be the primary key. But we could probably get rid of that in just a second, so let's see. All right, so we know that every reservation is going to be made by a particular customer. It's going to be made for a particular date and time, and then also for a particular table. And then maybe we need to know how many customers. So how many seats do we need? All right, so now our table here is going to be a table ID. So what we need to know is how many people are coming. So let's not call this num seats. Let's say num patrons, because I don't want to get confused with the number of seats that the table actually has. All right, so now for this particular reservation, we have a primary key of ID, and we have a foreign key of table ID, and that points to table.id, because that's our table up here. All right, so now here's the catch though. I have a column called ID that I created just for the purpose of having a primary key, but I could have selected customer date and time to be our primary key. And what that would be is I could have like Bob Smith, which actually this is going to be customer ID, by the way, which also is going to be a foreign key. Customer ID points to customer.id. So customer number 35 on this particular date at this particular time. So I could either create a column just to have the primary key, or I could select these three columns. Now the catch is that maybe, what if this customer requested a table for 4 and a table for 3 at the same time? And if I selected these three things, then that would only let me have one table. But what I could do is I could do something like customer ID and table ID. Well, okay, but this customer could have selected that table at a different date and time. So I'd really be looking at 4 columns, and it gets really messy. So if you ever deal with more than 2 columns to make up the primary key, just make one new one, and then you don't have to worry about it. All right, so let's see. We're assigning tables to waiters and waitresses. We also perform normal waiter functions and bill customers for orders. Oh, okay, so we need something about orders. So we're going to have an order table. All right, so each order will have an ID, and we'll have, say, like a subtotal. See, we need to keep track of how much tax was on it, how much the person tipped for it, and then how much the total amount was. All right, so then we're going to have a primary key of ID. And if we're going to keep track of orders, we should probably also keep track of our order line. And what that is all the stuff that was on a particular ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that for a particular order ID, we'll say order ID, and then what was listed on there, well, that was going to be the menu item, so menu ID, and then how many did they order. And so what we're going to do is we're going to allow out that on order number 100, we ordered item number 50, which is maybe a piece of crab, for we ordered 2 of those, and then we allow it to keep track of how much they ordered. Okay, so then we're going to have a subtotal, and that way we can keep track of how much that was. And the reason for doing the subtotal here is that what if I ordered it today and the price changes tomorrow, I don't want to have to go do a lookup to see how much it is. I want to know exactly how much they paid at that time. All right, so now our primary key is going to be order ID and menu ID. All right, so this is one of these bridge tables that's going to combine together our orders and our menus so that we can have a list of the things that people ordered. All right, so we're going to bill the customers for this. All right, so once the person orders this, we also need to keep track of how they paid for it. Okay, so maybe we're going to have a payment table. And each payment's going to have an ID number. So payment number 100. And it was for order number 300. And how did they pay for it? Maybe we have a payment type ID. So was it cash, check, credit card? Oh, okay, so we're going to need a payment type table. And so each payment type is going to have a description. So cash, credit card, MasterCard, Visa, so forth, with a primary key of ID. All right, so what that means here is that we have a primary key of ID, and we have a foreign key of payment type ID, which points to the payment type.id column. All right, so let's see, payment, we paid this particular ID for this order. They paid by this. How much did they pay? Let's just say amount, so we know exactly how much they paid. And then we can keep track of all of the different payments that we have. All right, so you can see how this is quickly turning into each thing that we do becomes one table that then becomes 2 or 3 more tables afterwards. And we quickly keep expanding this. So what we need to do is we've now gone through just the head waiter. Customer reservations for the hostess, assigns customers to tables. Okay, so that's our reservations up there. Responsible for posting specials. Okay, so we need a list of specials. So let's call it menu special, which we're going to have an ID. We're going to have a description for whatever it is, and then a price, and then maybe a begin date and end date. So that way we know when the specials were till when. Primary key, once again, is ID. And so the question is, our special here, if it's a menu item, maybe we want to list what the actual menu ID is. And so if we're going to do that, then we're going to say foreign key menu ID, and that points to menu.id, and so forth. All right, keep going. Let's see, our head chef is going to use current inventory to decide specials. Okay, well he or she is going to be the one that actually creates the special. The hostess is responsible for writing them. So you'll see that these two things actually overlap. All right, purchase food items. All right, so we need something to keep track of purchases. So we're going to have a purchase table. All right, so we're going to purchase things. Each purchase have an ID. We're going to purchase the item. Maybe it has a name and a description so we know what we ordered. Maybe we need some justification as to why it was purchased. We need to know how many were purchased, price each. Maybe we need to know who the vendor is, so vendor ID. Whoops, okay, well, that means we have a vendor table. Each vendor will have an ID, a name, a telephone number, and so forth. And you can see how this quickly keeps turning into more and more tables. All right, so then here our primary key is going to be ID. Our foreign key is going to be vendor ID, points to vendor.id. All right, so your job is to go through and finish designing the rest of this database. So you're actually going to turn it in DBDL format. You'll notice I've already started most of it for you. What I would strongly suggest is try to come up with a table like this so that way you can figure out if it actually fits in what you're trying to do. What I mean by that is you'll notice I entered some sample data in here. Well, if you create this type of table and you start adding dummy information into it, you'll start seeing that your table is working. And think about it from the perspective of when you add the data, if I add this particular manager ID number here, will it work for me to go back and look it up? And if it does, how do I do that? Well, that's my foreign keys. So I can look at position ID 1. Oh, that points to the position table. Okay, I have to get in here, look at the ID column, and it just makes it where I can look this information up. So the assignment for this week has two parts. One is to turn in the database design as DBDL. And so what you're going to do is you're just simply going to turn this in. You can type it all into a Word document, turn in the Word document with your design, and then you're going to upload that file to Blackboard. The other part is going to be actually implementing this in MySQL. There will be another video that follows with information on how to use MySQL, and then your job is going to be to actually create the database and upload that database design.